Hey, welcome to this demo. My name is Doug Milford from Lambda Valley. Today we're talking about the Lambda Valley Development Framework, specifically three-dimensional graphics. So on the phone we have Keith Milford. Keith, go ahead and say hello.
Oh, hello there.
We also have Suzanne Schwartz. Suzanne, I appreciate you joining.
Hello.
And we have Kobe Gross. Kobe, it's a pleasure to have you on the call.
Thank you.
So what we're currently looking at is the screen where it has a combination of two-dimensional and three-dimensional elements. So on the two-dimensional graphs, we can move these around and zoom in and out as we would normally, and they all kind of work very similarly. In the three-dimensional elements, we can move in 3 dimensions. So when I talk about 3 dimensions, there are 2 things that I want to discuss here. First one is for native controls. So what I currently have here are 2 native controls in 3D. And so I've made the framework so that you can create your own native controls and have them live within the framework itself. So instead of me having to predict everything that you might need now or in the future, I've kind of made it so that you can make your own and it'll slip right in just like it would any other control. So at the moment, this is all kind of, we got some 3D elements inside of a 2D space, and that's great, but we go beyond that. This is just the starting point. So I'm going to go to the playground. So this is just going to be a simple playground for us to demonstrate some of the 3D capabilities. At the moment, this looks like just a 2-dimensional screen. It only has 2 elements on it. The first one is a little box that if we click on it, it just changes color. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this one before, but it's just just to detect mouse events. The second one is a sparkle control that I think I've shown you guys before, and that doesn't really do much. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the gray part of this background, and I'm actually going to rotate it in 3 dimensions. So as I do that, you're going to actually see that the sparkle is actually not part of the 2-dimensional plane. It's pulled out a little bit. So I've made it very easy for the developer to be able to do that type of manipulation. As well, as you can see, as I'm turning things, it's obviously in 3D, but I can also turn the other element if I want. So as I turn something and move it in 3D, it is turned in 3D. So far, so good.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I'm not sure if I'm racing or not, so I'm going to actually open up the debug panel so we can see a little better what's going on here. So I'm going to highlight the sparkle, and when you highlight the sparkle, the DSS, as a reminder, DSS is just my replacement for CSS. So instead of cascading style sheet, it stands for Doug's style sheet. So our DSS, I put a couple of properties on there. One's rotate around the y-axis. One's going to be rotated around the x-axis, and then a z offset. So I've actually hooked up all 3 to this single control where I can move it with my mouse. So if I do the z offset, I'm going to use my wheel, and you're going to watch the z offset here. I can actually move it in and out, just like that. And so as I move it in and out, and I rotate it, you're going to see it's a little closer, or pull it out, and it's a little further away. So go ahead.
And you're doing this, in essence, it's like an HTML style, but it's with the DSS.
Correct. So let's go ahead and take a look at the code. And unfortunately, I have this in my way. Boop. That's good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the code of what's going on here. So all I'm doing is on the DSS of the sparkle, setting the rotation x-axis and the rotation y-axis, as well as the z offset. And so to set those, all I'm doing is capturing some mouse events. If the mouse is down, that means I should grab it. And as I move my mouse around, it should move it. Mouse up, lets it go. And then the mouse wheel just moves in and out. And all it is changing some local state for the control. So let's go ahead down to the actual events. So this event is like the mouse down. All it's doing is changing some local state. Not too complicated. And then as the mouse moves, all I'm doing is a little bit of math to say, okay, how far should that move around the y-axis? One thing I do want to note, and I wanted your guys' feedback on this, one thing I want to note is the y-axis. When you say rotate around the y-axis, somebody might think you're rotating like that. but the y-axis is the one pointing straight up, and so you're actually moving around in this direction. And for a non-mathematician, that might be confusing. And so I was kind of like, well, is there a better way to describe it instead of saying rotation around the y-axis or rotation around the x-axis? So if you guys have some thoughts on that, you don't have to answer right away, maybe later on. And if somebody's in the watching this as a YouTube video and later on says, hey, I have a good idea, I'm open to some suggestions. So all I'm doing really is setting some state, and then the next time it renders, just setting it on the DSS. And that's it. So it's really built into the entire framework for every div element, whether it's if you create a specialized one like the sparkle or some 3D graph or even some two-dimensional layout, you can rotate things and move things in and out quite naturally.
So how's the performance going? I mean, previously that was a big concern of yours. So how's it working?
The performance is really good. So this entire endeavor, I have been concerned about performance, but so far it's been fantastic. And there's also lots of areas I know I can still improve. So as we scale this up, I know we can make things better and better. But so far, I've been shocked. Now, it shouldn't be that shocking. I am completely disregarding all HTML and CSS, and so all that is gone. I'm just doing pure calculations. So
by design, you're essentially saying because this is the way you're designing it, you're taking control, and because of that control, you now are able to do a lot of performance you couldn't do before.
Yeah, and a lot of the performance actually comes from the lessons I've learned on doing React in the first place. But just having that middleman, that DOM layer, the HTML and CSS gone, I think that actually helps quite a bit. And the performance is actually quite good. So I'm very happy so far with the performance. I'm going to keep my eye on it, and I will improve it in the future. At the moment, functionality is my #1 concern, but so far it hasn't been a problem. So that's very good. So as you look at this, I'm really happy that the debug environment really plays nicely with it. So even if you have it pulled out a little bit or rotated, the debug environment hits it perfectly. And the only reason I had this color thing on here is to make sure the hit test. If I hit the very corner, it hits. If I hit outside of it, it will not trigger. So the only reason I had this control here was to say, hey, is my mouse accurately hitting the 3D object or not? As a side note, everything in here looks pretty much two-dimensional. Let's go back to here. Let's say all these elements are pretty much two-dimensional in nature. The reason the 3D works so easily in here is this is actually it's a mirage. It's really living. Everything is actually living in 3 dimensions. I'm just pushing the two-dimensional display far enough where it perfectly hits your browser dimensions. So when you look at it on any two-dimensional screen, you may think it's a two-dimensional layout, but in reality, it's 3 dimensions, and that's why when I rotate something, it's already in the 3D mode. It just doesn't seem like it on a two-dimensional screen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so this is a blown up graph of what we saw before. So as you can tell, when I move this thing in 3 dimensions, it can give you kind of a sense of where we're going with the augmented reality. Pretty soon here, you can just put one of these things on a wall, and as you're walking around the room, it'll be just sitting up on the wall. Here, let me push this away a little bit. So I believe this is going to be very powerful when creating not only two-dimensional layouts, so for a normal website, but also when you need to make something pop. So when you need something, let's say, to come out towards the user, and then so forget about the augmented reality for a moment. Even for regular websites, I think it's going to be a little bit of something that other people can't do, or at least can't do easily. And ours is just, hey, change the Z offset a little bit, and it'll kind of bring something a little more into focus. So let's go ahead and play around with the dashboard here. So we have this dashboard, and as I said, any element can be manipulated in 3D, including the entire page. So let's go ahead and monkey around with the entire page. So I'm going to turn the entire page, let's see here, on the DSS. So this is the definition of the page. And on the DSS, I'm just going to say I'm going to rotate around the y-axis. And remember, the y-axis is up like this. That means I'm rotating it left and right. And it's in radians. Oh, this is another thing I want to ask you guys. I'm assuming in radians. But if you're not a mathematician, that may not make sense. So put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that. If I forget, please remind me. I don't want to sidetrack too much, but I do want to talk about that topic a little bit. So anyways, I'm going to press save. And it's going to turn our graphs, all of them, as if it's on a single pane. So now you can say, ah, that's my dashboard, and it's over on that left-hand wall, so to speak. Somebody might say, hey, a lot of stuff's cut off. How come it's cut off? Well, a lot of that stuff is now brought beyond the view of the camera. So it's kind of like if you had a poster board and you turned a little bit, some of it goes away from the camera. But we got a little solution for that. So when I'm turning these things, I'm turning it around the center, but nothing stops us from turning it around an arbitrary point. And so I also have some properties for rotating around the x point. So 0 stands for the very left-hand side, and then 1 stands for the very right-hand side. 0.5 stands for the very middle. The default is in the middle at 0.5, but there's nothing stopping us from, let's say, opening it like a door. So if I'm going to hold that, the left-hand edge stable, I can actually push everything else away from it. Just like that. So as you can see, this graph probably over here is the one that's going to be the most obvious of what's going on. It holds that left edge and then shifts it away from it instead of doing it at the center.
So you could say programmatically even swing this into view.
Yes.
Like a door onto your screen almost.
Yes.
And you're doing this through essentially HTML kind of concept. You're doing a three-dimensional HTML essentially. But all it is like a few extra attributes on there on your DSS instead of a CSS.
Yes, and so I think it really gives you a lot of flexibility. The entire screen can be turned, and that means we could have multiple screens occupying the same 3D space, but one's on one wall and one's on a different wall. And now you got a lot of creativity that you can do. And these things still work like they normally should if I want to turn these things around and stuff. And the graphs still work like they should. But I really think it opens it up quite a bit and is a nice built-in feature into the framework. So getting back to what I wanted to talk about. So I was talking about this rotation point X, 0 to 1. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the radians. So this is assumed to be radians, right? Radians. Somebody who's not coming from a math background might not think in radians. That's something that you learn in trigonometry, but you could be programming this stuff before you learn trigonometry. I was thinking about making it a little more flexible where you could do any one of multiple different types of rotation. So I might have rotation y-axis and say it's an object that has radians. Or it could be an object that has degrees, or it could be an object with turns. So if one turn would be like a full 360 degrees, if you will. And then you could assign any one of these to that property, and I think that would actually give a lot of flexibility. What do you guys think? Is that overkill? Is that useful? I don't know if...
I think for the purpose of adoption, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
I don't know, Kobe and Suzanne, what do you think?
Yeah, for most of the 3D programs I've ever used, they usually use things like degrees, but having the option to use multiply, I mean, it is a simple conversion, I would imagine, so it would make sense to use it if you have it.
Yeah, yeah. In the background, all I would do is say, hey, is this in degrees? Right. Once I see that, I convert it into radians, and then through the pipeline, for the calculations, it's still exactly the same. So yeah, and so I can see if you put a number there, it knows it's radians. If you want to put something specific, no problem. And that if that's how you think in degrees or in turns or whatever, I can support any one of these. So it might look. I haven't really built that functionality yet, but it might look just like that, and it would work just fine.
So it goes farther to customize and individualize for whoever's using it.
Yeah, and makes it so that you can use whatever you're comfortable with. Not necessarily I'm forcing you to learn trigonometry to the point where you're comfortable with radians. And
well, that's comforting for those of us who don't have that background.
Yes. So I was really thinking, and I really just as I was getting ready for this demo, I was really kind of like, I think that might be helpful. And so I'm kind of pinging around. I don't even think it'd be hard to implement, like Kobe was saying. It's just a simple translation. So I think I might do it, unless somebody had any reason why I shouldn't. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's once you get that locked down, it's essentially available. Maybe you want to do instead of having like an object, you have a 1R means 1 radians, 1D means 1 degree.
Oh, that's interesting.
1T. Throwing it out there, or rotation YX radians is your variable name, and then if you fill that, it essentially puts it in the real variable. If you put it into the degrees one, I'm just giving you some options.
Yeah. That
would just fundamentally flow down to the real one.
Yeah, that's something to think about. That's interesting. So in terms of this rotation point X 0 to 1, I want your feedback. Is that intuitive? Does that make sense? And it's ironic when you're rotating around the y-axis, and then what you do to pin something on that rotation, you say rotation point X 0 to 1. I think that might be a little confusing. So I'm kind of like, maybe I should redo that. But if you guys have, and again, you don't need to come up with something now, but if you guys have something that might work a little better, it makes sense to me, but I'm the one who made it. So maybe if you guys have a different idea, we might be able to improve it.
Just food for thought. Yeah. You might have people that want to do like a -5.
Yeah, it actually does.
Like
yeah, it does allow negatives. So okay. Negative, let's say 0.5.
Yeah, I think that one's actually it's intuitive. I understand it. I don't see anything wrong with it. I'm sure somebody will say, well, maybe I want like a fixed pixels away or something like that, as opposed to like a percentage go to 1.
Yeah.
But I don't think you need to boil the oceans right now. That made perfect sense. I think it works for almost everybody's needs.
Yeah, but you do bring up a good point. The fixed point. So currently, what I've been showing you is kind of a relative point system. So when I turn something, it's relative to where it's currently at. But I can see somebody saying, I want an absolute rotation or position or something like that. And that's definitely on the roadmap. But at the moment, what I'm showing you is just the relative stuff. So that kind of fits in line with what you're saying people might want. I think that's a good point. So, okay. So are there any questions as we're doing this? Not for you?
Well, one thing, I know one of your original goals was to keep this cross-platform. In
right.
other words, you can use it on Chrome, you can use it on whatever. Is this still true? Is this something that you've stayed true to?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It is still completely cross-platform. All this stuff is just math that I'm doing in the background to determine where I want the layouts to be. And getting away from the HTML and CSS and the conflicting browser interpretations of both of those is what was going to be hampering stuff in the first place, and that stuff's gone. So all these calculations, any calculations I do, are still going to be completely cross-platform because it's just my pure calculations, and I'm not relying on the browser to interpret anything. So yes.
So yeah, so everything is consistent. You will not have Firefox reading this one div that's got a different CSS.
Right.
And, interpret it slightly differently than Chrome, so you don't have to fight that anymore.
Right. Right. So a web developer is used to, if they're using some type of CSS, they're used to going to browser documentation saying what browsers support it, what browsers don't, at what version does it support it. All that is gone because I'm just doing all calculations myself. So yeah.
Even though it looks, essentially it's got the same concept of a div and an HTML, it's essentially you're taking control and you're saying you're gonna lift this into the 3D
right.
concept.
I'm taking control, exactly. So yeah. Any other questions as we're doing this? I'm gonna pull that screen a little. I think that's pretty much the end of the discussion. It's just really to show you things moving around in 3D. It's not too difficult to understand.
Cool.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Does look good, yeah.
Yeah. So the next steps I kind of want to do is animations in CSS. Sometimes you can have animations go over a period of time and things change. I really want to integrate that as a next step to say my own animations can animate from any state to any state and make it nice and easy for the developer. Just like this 3D stuff should be nice and easy for the developer. That's a main core concept, is the developer has to feel at home and not have to learn all these esoteric stuff. So once we get that, Keith, I think you guys still have that dashboard that I created in React. I think I'd like to use that as a prototype for replacing that with the new framework, and perhaps polishing up that dashboard a little bit with some of these graphics. I think that would be a great first starting point.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think we would actually really like to see that.
Great.
To do that, I'm going to go ahead and get some data for you so that you can at least play around.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. So, all right, I think that's it unless we have any more questions. All right, thank you guys very much. I'm going to go ahead and post this on YouTube, and I appreciate you coming to the demo, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.